I have got to bring my panel in. It's an excellent one, and I know I need them to help me get smarter here. Maya Wiley, Senior Vice President for Social Justice at the New School. Matt Bennett, Senior Vice President for Third Way, who also served in the Clinton White House. Elise Jordan, a contributor to Time Magazine, who served in the George W. Bush White House. And Amy Parnas, Senior White House Correspondent for The Hill. Matt, I want to go to you first. You worked in the White House. Given the amount of people that are leaving, that are getting fired, how can the Department of Homeland Security actually function, get the job done with all of these top people being forced out?
I mean, it can't. That's a great question. People seem to think that the bureaucracy is so large that it'll just continue to churn along. And at one level, that's true, right? TSA will continue to operate. The Border Patrol will continue to show up for work and do their jobs because they're professionals. The problem is that without political appointees in charge, they cannot make decisions. And the White House is pretty understaffed, too. Basically, Stephen Miller, who is this horrendous staffer to the president who is apparently behind this purge, is essentially making all of the decisions for the government, and that doesn't work. Elise will tell you that the White House can make only the decisions at the pinnacle of the government, but there are constant daily things that must be done. And if you think about what happened during the horror of child separation, when HHS wasn't talking to Border Patrol or ICE, and you had families separated without any records, those are the kinds of things that are going to happen.
Elise, do you see a plan here? Are we moving towards a goal? I think back to Steve Bannon. Remember, Steve Bannon said, I just want to blow the whole system up. That's what's happening here.
I spoke to a former Homeland Security official who said that this is Donald Trump pitching a fit that people won't break the law for him. And so he's just trying to move down the rungs of his apparatus and hopefully find someone who's going to become an acting secretary at any various agency that he doesn't have staffed, who is willing to commit crimes, basically, in his name because they want the power.
Is that why Republicans are actually getting angry at this? I want to share. I think we have Ron Johnson, who commented on this. And this is a guy who is the Homeland Security Committee chairman and a Republican. Listen to this.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned of a growing void of leadership within the Department of Homeland Security. And this is a department that is charged with really trying to grapple with some of the most significant challenges facing this nation.
So are they mad because people are getting fired? Are they mad because Congress is out of the loop? If he's complaining about the people at the top are getting fired, and they're getting fired by the president.
I think it's all across the board. They're also mad about 2020 because how does this look for people who are competing, Senate Republicans who are in jeopardy? How does this look for their whole party? You might recall, Stephanie, how it was last year when you heard voices when the family immigration, the separation became an issue for Republicans. This is not something that they want to come back to in any way. And a lot of people like Chuck Grassley are very close to these people. They know them well. They know that these people aren't guilty of doing anything wrong. They see that the president is just simply firing people for the sake of firing people. And I think that is problematic. And that is why you're hearing more and more, of course, Republicans kind of coming out to kind of, put the kibosh on that.
Maya, it's not political, but the president is going after judges. And yesterday, a judge ruled that the president cannot have his wishes. Asylum seekers do not have to wait in Mexico. That's the law. But we know the president doesn't like it. Do we run the risk that he takes some sort of executive action to circumvent the law?
I think Donald Trump has established that this thing called the Constitution is not something he's read or cares about, because the separation.
But maybe he doesn't need to if he can do what he wants.
Well, he can't do what he wants if it's not legal or constitutional. One of the things that we have to recognize about the court opinion itself, which I think goes to this conversation about leadership at Homeland Security, is not that there wasn't a lawful process to try to accomplish some of what the president wanted. What the ruling actually says is, if you can find a way to adequately protect people, you may be able to do what you want to do. If you go to Congress and find a way to legislate some of the policies you want to legislate, you may be able to do some of what you want to do. We can debate whether that's good policy, because I would challenge that. But the point is, the president has a lawful and constitutional process to achieve some of or part of his policy goals. He just doesn't want to. And I think this goes back to Elise's point. It's his absolute, look, leaders lead. Leaders look for collaborators and people they can work with to solve problems. What Donald Trump does is look for enemies.
Okay, but then hate the game, not the player. He doesn't have the law on his side, and he's going after the player, Kirstjen Nielsen.
And if he goes the executive route, right, we saw this with the Muslim ban, that too will be challenged in court. And when you have a judge who has laid out a lawful process that you can go through to try to achieve some of your policy ends, and you ignore it, you say that judges should be fired, you actually complain about politicians who come to you and say one solution is we need more judges. We could process these cases more quickly and have less of a crisis if we had more judges. And you get angry that someone proposes potential solutions to the problem. That is not leadership.
Okay, Matt, let's go back to Stephen Miller, because Stephen Miller is the mastermind behind this, the wizard behind the curtain. But you touched on this before. As far as policy nuts and bolts, Stephen Miller and the president's visions cannot be legally executed. What position does this put the president in? Stephen Miller is not a policy guy. He's a communications guy. He's a speechwriter. So he can deliver a speech for the president that can get his base all riled up. But when it comes to executing, isn't the curtain going to get pulled back at some point? You can fire Kirstjen Nielsen and everyone else, but if you can't execute what the president wants, hey, Stephen Miller, head yourself back onto school.
Absolutely. One of the things that's most remarkable about Donald Trump is he's been president now for 2.5 years, and he hasn't learned the most fundamental things about being president, which is you can't run the country like he ran the Trump Organization.
Bankrupt 4 times?
Exactly. He drove it. He was a terrible businessman. It was tiny. When people didn't do exactly what he wanted, he got into a kind of impetuous fit and he fired them. And what Stephen Miller does is he just pushes those buttons in Trump, and he is like an 8-year-old. And when you have an 8-year-old in charge and you're able to rile him up, what he'll do is just lash out. The problem, as you point out, is once you fire everybody, there's nobody to do the things you want them to do. What he's left with now are career officials, and they sure as hell aren't going to go out and do illegal things. So this is going to make it more difficult, as Maya said, to do the things he actually wants to do.
Elise, let's talk politics for a moment. 2020. Who is the president doing this for? Stephen Miller wants migrant parents separated from their children at the border, arrested, or sent back home. I think back to August of 2018 when Ivanka Trump did an interview with Axios, and she said the zero tolerance policy was a dark point for her. If that was a dark point for her, sister, we're heading on back and going way, way deeper. Who are they doing this for? Lou Dobbs and Rush Limbaugh?
Donald Trump wants the admiration of his friends in right-wing media. But, you know, you look at who this is impacting.
But hold on. Are right-wing media disappointed with what he's done so far?
Oh, you hear constantly how he's not, he's not being tough enough. But you know who this actually affects? Farmers right now who need to start, harvesting, planting. There's a lot going. This is literally farm season. And I was just in Mississippi and talking to a farmer who was complaining, loves Donald Trump, but is saying it's a lot more expensive to have a migrant labor workforce over to actually do the work that he needs to get done on his farm. So Chuck Grassley also is complaining there. He's representing Iowa. There are repercussions for this policy all around the country.
The president did say, we're closed, we don't need you. We do need you, specifically in areas like agriculture. Do you forecast that the president takes executive order, does something to change policies when he realizes it's not Kirstjen Nielsen, he just doesn't have the law on his side?
I think he's going to try, because he has tried everything else. He has tried with people. He has tried with legislation. Nothing is working. So when you're Trump, what else do? You go to executive action. You try to sort of sneak around what you're supposed to do. And I think he's going to try everything he can do to sort of make that happen. And that's why I think you're getting kind of some cautionary tones coming from Capitol Hill, like, don't do this. You're putting us in a very bad position. We are coming into 2020. None of this looks good. No one wants to talk about immigration on the Hill. They wanted to kind of sweep that past, in the past. So I think this is all a very precarious situation for Republicans.
What happens when you clean house if your overall plan is to get dirtier?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.